I stood in my own dining room, staring at the long oak table, and realized my chair was gone. Six places were set with my best china, occupied by my son, Julian, his wife, Fiona, and her extended family. I held a bowl of freshly roasted vegetables, the steam warming my hands, but the room felt ice cold. Fiona glanced up, her lips curving into a tight, dismissive smirk. "Oh, Bonnie." We ran out of room. "Why don't you take your plate to the kitchen island?" Before I could respond, Julian leaned back in his chair, irritated that the meal was delayed. "Go beg on the streets." "You beggar," my son yelled, his voice echoing off the walls. "Just go eat in the kitchen. Stop hovering and making everyone uncomfortable." The clinking of silverware stopped. Fiona's parents stared at me, their eyes wide, waiting for me to shatter. They expected tears. They expected me to lower my head and shuffle away like a scolded dog. I took a slow, deep breath. The scent of the roast I had paid for and cooked filled my lungs. I looked straight at Julian. I didn't raise my voice, but the quietness of my tone cut through the room like glass. "Fine," I replied, setting the bowl down firmly on the edge of the table. "But you're the one who will be leaving." I turned on my heel and walked out. I didn't run, and I didn't look back. I went straight to my bedroom and quietly shut the door. My heart thumped steadily against my ribs, but my mind was crystal clear. I wasn't going to cry over a boy who forgot who raised him. Instead, I opened my nightstand drawer, pulled out my laptop, and began typing. The dinner party could continue without me, but their comfortable ride on my dime was over. This disrespect didn't happen overnight. It crept in like a slow leak under the sink, rotting the floorboards before you even noticed the dampness. Julian and Fiona moved into my house 7 months ago. The story they fed me was practical. They wanted to save for a down payment on their own place. As a widow, living alone in a 4-bedroom house. I thought it made sense, but within weeks, Fiona started treating the house as her personal kingdom. She rearranged the living room, packing my favorite reading chair into the basement because it didn't match her minimalist aesthetic. Then, the groceries changed. I was paying the bills, but my fridge suddenly filled with her expensive organic smoothies and imported cheeses, while my simple oat milk was pushed to the very back. I didn't argue. I observed. I watched Julian morph from a capable young man into a passive shadow, agreeing with every ridiculous demand Fiona made. He let her speak down to me. When I asked them to help with the utility bills, which had doubled since their arrival, Julian rolled his eyes and muttered that I was being petty. I wasn't a victim, and I never intended to be one. After my husband passed, I managed the finances, fixed the leaky roof, and kept this household running. I knew how to survive. I had just mistakenly believed that family wouldn't take advantage of my kindness. As I sat in my bedroom, listening to the muffled laughter from the dining room, I felt a strange sense of relief. The illusion was broken. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't need to endure the microaggressions or the constant feeling of being a guest in my own home. I pulled up my online banking portal. The screen glowed in the dim room, highlighting the joint credit card account I had generously set up for emergencies. It was time for a little housekeeping. I clicked the Manage Cards button and scrolled to Julian's name. Without a second thought, I hit Deactivate. I did the same for Fiona's authorized card. The screen refreshed, confirming the action. Just like that. The endless stream of online shopping packages and upscale dinners out was cut off. Next, I opened the utility app on my phone, the Wi-Fi network, which I paid a premium for so Julian could work from home while actually playing video games, was easily accessible. I changed the password. It was a small, quiet action, but I knew it would hit them where it hurt. I slipped out of my room and walked down the back stairs to the garage. My husband's old SUV, which Julian had practically claimed as his own, sat perfectly parked. I walked over, opened the driver's door, and pulled the spare key from the center console. I locked the doors with my master fob and dropped the keys deep into the pocket of my cardigan. The house was still buzzing with dinner conversation, oblivious to the shifts happening beneath the surface. I didn't need to shout or throw plates to make a point. Real control doesn't require a raised voice. It just requires a steady hand. I returned to my room, made myself a cup of chamomile tea using my electric kettle, and sat in my armchair. I heard the front door finally close as Fiona's parents left. The heavy footsteps of my son thudded up the stairs, passing my door without a single knock or apology. I sipped my tea, letting the warmth settle in my chest. The storm was coming tomorrow morning, but I was the one holding the umbrella. They wanted me out of their sight. I was simply granting their wish. Starting with my wallet, the knock on my door came at 7:30 the next morning. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a heavy, impatient thud. "Mom, did you mess with the router?" Julian's voice carried a mix of annoyance and entitlement. I opened the door, fully dressed in my gardening clothes, holding a fresh cup of coffee. I looked at him calmly. His hair was a mess. His phone gripped tightly in his hand. "Good morning." "Julian." "Yes." "I changed the Wi-Fi password." I answered, taking a slow sip of my coffee. His jaw dropped slightly. "Why I have a morning meeting?" "Give me the new password." "No," I replied flatly. Fiona appeared behind him, wrapping her silk robe tightly around her waist. "Bonnie, stop being petty because of last night. We have things to do. And where are the keys to the SUV? I need to go to Pilates." I shifted my gaze to her. "The SUV is mine. Fiona, I pay the insurance, the gas, and the maintenance. You don't have access to it anymore." Julian stepped forward, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "Mom, you can't just cut us off like this. We live here too." "You reside here," I corrected him. "You don't contribute. After your little outburst at dinner, I realized I've been failing you as a mother. I've made your life too easy. That ends today." I walked past them, heading down the hallway toward the stairs. Fiona scoffed loudly. "You're ridiculous. We're going out for breakfast," she snapped, pulling Julian by the arm. I kept walking, a small, knowing smile touching my lips. Let them go. They would figure out the credit cards soon enough. I headed straight to the kitchen. The sink was overflowing with crusty plates and wine glasses from their dinner party. I grabbed a heavy-duty trash bag. If they thought I was cleaning up their mess, they were entirely mistaken. I didn't wash a single dish. Instead, I carefully picked out my vintage silverware and the good plates, washed only those, and packed them away in a secure box. I left Fiona's greasy pots and half-eaten roast exactly where they were. 2 hours later, the front door slammed open. Julian marched into the kitchen, his face flushed an angry red, holding a plastic takeout bag. Fiona followed, looking furious. "My card declined at the bakery," Julian shouted, tossing the receipt on the counter. It was humiliating. "Mom, Why did you freeze the account I wiped down the countertops around their mess? It's my account. Julian. I simply removed the authorized users. If you want to buy scones, you can use your own money. Fiona glared at the sink. And you didn't even clean the kitchen. This is disgusting. We had guests last night. Your guests, Fiona, I corrected, leaning against the counter. I was told to go beg on the streets. So, I removed myself from your dinner and from your chores. Julian groaned, rubbing his temples. Mom, come on. I was stressed last night. I didn't mean it. Just turn the cards back on and give us the Wi-Fi. We're family. It was the classic Julian move, a half-hearted apology designed to make things comfortable for him again. But my patience had dried up. Family doesn't treat each other like disposable servants, I replied, my voice steady. You have exactly 1 week to find a new place. 7 days. Next Friday. You're out. Fiona laughed a harsh, grating sound. Can't do that. We get mail here. We live here. I didn't argue. I didn't engage with her challenge. I just looked at my son. 7 days. Julian, I suggest you start packing instead of yelling. I turned and walked out to the garden. They thought it was an empty threat. They had no idea how serious I was. The next few days became a quiet war of attrition. Julian and Fiona tried to act like nothing had changed, ignoring the mounting pile of dirty dishes and the lack of internet. They used their phone data until they hit their limits and ate cheap takeout using their own dwindling bank accounts. I didn't sit around waiting for them to take me seriously. I went to the hardware store and bought flattened cardboard boxes. On Tuesday afternoon, while they were out, I started boxing up the items they had scattered in the common areas. Fiona's expensive throws, her decorative vases, Julian's gaming console all went into boxes. I stacked them neatly by the front door. When they came home, Fiona stopped dead in her tracks. What is this? Are you touching my things? I looked up from taping a box shut. I'm helping you pack. Friday is approaching fast. Julian stepped between us, his face pale. Mom, be reasonable. We don't have enough for a deposit yet. Where are we supposed to go? That is something you should have considered before treating me like a beggar in my own home. I answered, I provided a roof, and you provided disrespect. The arrangement is over. Fiona grabbed a box cutter from the table and aggressively sliced open a box. I'm unpacking. You're insane if you think we're leaving. I didn't snatch the box cutter back. I didn't yell. I simply picked up the taped box of my grandmother's china that I had secured earlier, carrying it safely to my room. Unpack if you want. Fiona. I called over my shoulder. But you'll just have to pack it again. My house. My rules. They thought this was a negotiation. They thought if they pushed hard enough, the mother who always gave in would eventually cave. But the woman they were dealing with now wasn't the pushover they remembered. Thursday morning, the house was tense. The smell of unwashed dishes had finally forced Fiona to clean the kitchen, though she slammed every cabinet door to ensure I heard her displeasure. I sat at the small patio table outside, drinking my tea, watching the birds at the feeder. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my sister-in-law, Martha. Bonnie. Julian called. He says you're throwing them out on the street. What is going on? Fiona was obviously working the family network, playing the victim. In the past, I would have panicked. I would have typed out long paragraphs defending myself, trying to manage everyone's opinion. Now, I felt nothing but a calm detachment. I took a quick photo of the patio garden, the morning sun hitting the roses. I replied to Martha. Julian and Fiona are moving out tomorrow. They're ready for their own space. Hope you're doing well. I put the phone on silent and slid it into my pocket. No drama. No explanations. I walked back inside and headed straight for the master bedroom, which I had graciously given to them when they moved in, taking the smaller guest room for myself. The door was open. Fiona was inside, aggressively shoving clothes into a suitcase. She looked up, her eyes narrowing. "Are you here to gloat?" she snapped. "No," I said, stepping inside and taking down the curtains I had bought years ago. "I'm just reclaiming my space." "We're not leaving tomorrow," Julian said, appearing in the doorway. He looked exhausted. "We haven't found an apartment." I folded the curtains neatly over my arm. "Then you'll have to book a motel. Your presence here ends at 5 p.m. tomorrow." I walked past him, smelling the stale sweat of his stress. He reached out to grab my arm, but I leveled a cold stare at his hand until he dropped it. The boundaries were set in stone. Friday morning arrived with a clear blue sky. Julian and Fiona left the house early, muttering something about looking at a short-term rental. They left most of their boxes unpacked in the living room, assuming they could stretch the deadline by leaving their belongings as anchors. They severely underestimated me. As soon as their car pulled out of the driveway, I picked up my phone and called a local moving crew I had hired earlier in the week. 2 strong men arrived within 20 minutes, everything in the living room marked with blue tape, and the remaining items in the master bedroom. I instructed, handing them cash. "Move it all into the garage." Within 2 hours, the house was emptied of their clutter. I stood in the center of the living room, breathing in the open space. I wiped down the shelves, vacuumed the floors, and moved my favorite reading chair back to its rightful spot by the window. Next came the hardware. I didn't need a locksmith. Over the years, I had learned how to fix things around the house myself. I brought my toolbox to the front door, unscrewed the old lock, and installed a brand new deadbolt I had purchased days ago. I did the same for the back door and the garage access door. I placed their suitcases on the front porch, neatly lined up against the brick wall. I locked the deadbolt from the inside, hearing the satisfying click of the heavy metal sliding into place. I walked to the kitchen and brewed a fresh pot of coffee. The house was completely silent. There were no heavy footsteps, no demanding voices, no slamming doors. I sat at my clean oak dining table, in my own chair, and waited for the clock to strike 5. The preparations were complete. At 5:15 p.m., the sound of a car door shutting echoed from the driveway. I didn't get up. I simply pulled up the camera app on my phone and watched the live feed from the porch. Julian walked up the steps first, looking exhausted. He reached for the handle, pushed, and frowned when it didn't budge. He pulled out his key and shoved it into the lock. It jammed halfway. He jiggled it, cursed, and tried again. Fiona walked up behind him, spotting the suitcases stacked near the welcome mat. Her mouth dropped open. "Julian." She put our bags outside. Julian began pounding on the heavy wooden door. "Mom, open the door." "My key isn't working." I pressed the microphone button on my phone app. My voice came out clear and calm through the porch speaker. "Your key doesn't work because the locks are new. Your deadline was 5 p.m. Julian stared at the camera, his face a mix of shock and anger. "You actually locked us out, Mom. You can't just do this." "You're welcome to call a motel, Julian," I replied evenly. "But you don't pay rent. You have no lease, and you've contributed nothing. The rest of your boxes are in the garage. The code is changed, but I will leave the side door open for exactly 1 hour tomorrow morning for you to load a truck. Do not come back to the front door. Fiona pushed in front of the camera, her face red. "You're an awful mother. You're putting your own son on the street. I'm putting a grown man out of my house," I corrected her. "You told me to go beg on the streets. Julian, I'm simply staying in my home. Goodbye." I turned off the microphone. I watched the screen as they argued with each other, eventually dragging their suitcases down the driveway to wait for an Uber. I put my phone away and smiled. A month passed, and the heavy atmosphere that had suffocated my house completely vanished. The master bedroom was mine again, filled with my photos, my soft linens, and the morning light. The dining table sat polished and clean, waiting only for guests I actually wanted to invite. Julian tried to text me a few times. At first, he was angry, sending long paragraphs about how I had ruined his life. I didn't reply. Then, the tone shifted. He asked if we could meet for coffee, saying he missed me and realized he had made mistakes. I agreed to meet him at a small diner downtown. He looked tired, the arrogance completely wiped from his posture. Fiona wasn't with him. He apologized. A real, stammering apology, admitting he had let himself be influenced and had taken my generosity for granted. I listened quietly, stirring my tea. "I forgive you, Julian," I said finally. "But forgiveness doesn't mean a free pass. You are my son, and I will always love you. But you will never live under my roof again, and my wallet is permanently closed." He nodded slowly, accepting the boundary. There was no movie magic reconciliation, no tearful hugs promising everything would go back to normal. Normal was what got us into that mess. This was a new reality, built on respect and hard lines. When I drove back to my house, I parked in the driveway and looked at the front porch. There were no bags, no angry voices waiting inside. I unlocked the door with my new key and stepped into the quiet hallway. I hung up my coat, walked into the dining room, and pulled out my chair. I sat down, poured myself a glass of water, and enjoyed the complete, beautiful silence. I wasn't a beggar in my own life anymore. I was the owner,